Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. We do indeed have a special guest later on, who I will introduce in just a few minutes. But as is customary, I'll talk about a few bits of news and family party news to start off with. I was at the family party meeting at the Fife branch in Kirkcaldy yesterday evening. That was very good. Starting to, as all branches are, starting to think about preparation for the Westminster election. And the other family party news is, I know we've had a lot of new branch chairmen recently. We're looking at appointing some spokeswomen on various topics as well. We've got 3 people who've come forward with a particular area of expertise or area of interest where they'd like to be the Scottish Family Party's representative on that issue, a bit like being the shadow minister in the opposition. So someone to follow what's going on that subject and to speak on the behalf of the Scottish Family Party on that subject as well, do a bit of research, put together our case. If that's something you think you might be interested in a certain area, whether it's an area that the family party is already currently very active in, or if it's an area outside our usual range of topics, we'd be interested in hearing from you. So do get in touch, contact at scottishfamily.org, and we can have a chat to see if there's an opportunity for you there. Now, the next thing I need this evening, I need to get something off my chest, because I've been listening to Radio 4 the last couple of days. You've probably heard me say before, it's just unbelievable listening to Radio 4. Program after program is about climate change, racism, sexism, inequality, LGBT, immigration, just basically things from their agenda. The things the BBC thinks should be the top of everybody's agenda as well. So I'm just going to go through the 5 programs I've listened to driving up and down Scotland in the last few days. And these are not selected from more. This is the total of what I listened to. There's a program about fishing in the UK, the fishing industry. It'll be quite interesting. Guess what angle they were taking? Guess what angle they were taking? I mean, I know you can guess, can't you? You already know. It's about women in fishing, obviously. There's a program about fishing. Then there's a program about immigration into the United States of America, and some of the tensions that caused. So, interesting enough, but there's more to history than immigration and colonialism and slavery. Then there's a program about climate change. Again, I don't mind them having a program about climate change. I just mind that it's like repeated like 20 times a day. You just get it over and over and over and over again. And this program, people were making the point that if we just went greener, that would help the economy more and more. It would create jobs and it would boost the economy. I just think, be honest. If you're going to move to less efficient means of energy generation, etc., that's not going to boost the economy. Okay, if you have some sort of new green energy, it's going to employ people, but it's going to employ them in that instead of the alternatives that will then become redundant. And also, if energy is more expensive, that will cost other people their jobs in the economy as well. So it's just frustrating. This being presented as like a win-win situation, but it's not a win-win. There are compromises to be made. There are 2 sides of the argument. So that was that program. Then there's a drama I listened to that was set in Africa. I only listened to a few minutes, but it's basically about an African church leader who was a con man, obviously entirely in keeping with the BBC's agenda. And then there's another program, some sort of religious discussion program, and they had a Protestant and a Catholic Christian, but both of them were very, very liberal. They weren't really arguing in favor of the truth of Christianity at all. I mean, they're probably more like doing the opposite. Then they had a Muslim as well. Now, the Muslim was very much promoting Islam, and I've got no criticism of him for that at all. I mean, that's what therefore, as a Muslim, is going to take that opportunity. Then that's absolutely fine. But again, that's the setup that the BBC had created. They were talking about translating religious texts from one form to another. And then the Muslim who'd been speaking about the Quran, etc., and he finished off by saying he'd been translating some Persian poetry into English. But it was very difficult since English was the language of oppression, racism, colonialism, industrial damage, environmental harm, etc. That's what the English language is about. So trying to translate beautiful poetry into English, I mean, that really was a challenge for him. And that was that. So there's a sort of little snapshot of BBC output. I'm going to do a systematic experiment soon. maybe over Christmas, when I turn on the radio at random points in time and count how many seconds it is before they get onto one of their pet topics. So, right, I feel better for that, having shared that with you. Now, we've got some other things to talk about. We'll talk about later, but I will introduce our special guest, who no doubt some of you will remember from other live streams and other family party events. So this evening, I'm joined by Belinda Brown. Belinda, welcome.
Hello. Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Now, those of you who don't know Belinda, Belinda spoke at our conference last year. She's been on the live stream a few times, and a supporter of the family party, even though she lives in England. And Belinda, how would I describe you? A researcher, a writer, a thinker, an intellectual with a particular interest in family issues. Would that be a good description?
That's a fair description. Yes, yes, that would be me. Yes.
So it's great to have Belinda on board with her expertise, helping us with these areas. Now we're going to start off hearing a little bit about Belinda's travels, because you've been somewhere quite exotic by most people's standards.
Yes.
Tell us about your recent.
Yes.
trip.
Well, I recently went on a trip to Kazakhstan with my friend Louise Kirk, who promotes a really great sort of children's educational program called Alive to the World. And she was talking about her work to do with that, and I was talking about family and marriage and monogamy and all the sorts of things that that I might talk about with the Scottish Family Party. And it was, so we did lots of talks. I didn't get to see perhaps as much of Kazakhstan as I'd have liked, because the first place we were in, it was Astana, which is up in the north, and it was, funnily enough, it was at -7, and this was explained to me was actually incredibly warm, because it could get to -30 even at this time of year. But it was all covered in snow, so you kind of got taxis everywhere. But I'd sort of been a bit worried before I went, because I thought, all the research I do and the talks that I write are kind of designed to fight feminism and fight LGBT and fight all the sort of evil forces that we're having to deal with in this society. And I sort of thought, well, what am I going to talk about I was sort of imagining it would be a fairly traditional society and they'd have more to teach us, and what would I be able to tell them? But actually I found out that what I was saying really did have a place. They do have sort of serious, very high divorce rates, incredibly high abortion rates. I suppose all the things that you would find in the former Soviet Union, very high rates of single parenthood, and as a social anthropologist, I felt like I'd love to go in and do a proper study. So, that what I picked up was just on the basis of giving talks and talking to the audience, afterwards about what was going on. But it seems that, firstly, there's the whole Soviet thing where women are, very secure in the workplace. But there's also, they've got this interesting thing where in the Second World War, and at the time I was thinking, well, what's this got to do with today? But in the Second World War, the men of Kazakhstan were very much used as cannon fodder for the war, and they have apparently they're regarded as little princes or whatever. The men have a very high status because there was this period of history when they were all being systematically killed off. And interestingly, even today I heard that there is a Kazakhstani city in Russia where apparently they've taken 60 men to go and fight on the front line. But the reason why it's still such a problem is because they live with their mothers-in-law. So that was, we were chatting about that. And it's always quite interesting because it was in a way, it was a similar setup to what you have in India, where the mother-in-law has a lot of power. And it's funny because, feminists would always be very fond of talking about the oppression and, you know, sexism of India, but it was actually created by women, by the mother-in-law. So it's a similar situation in Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
And anyway,
so just about Kazakhstan, I'm pretty ignorant about it. I mean, with a stan at the end of the name, I assume it's majority Muslim, is it?
Do you know, it is a majority Muslim. It's vast majority Muslim, but it's not Muslim. Yes, you see the occasional large mosque, but I didn't see anybody, or I saw about one person in I don't know what you know, salwar, you know, in the headdress.
Right.
So I didn't see anybody wearing headdresses. I asked, you know, a lot of the food involved pork sausages, and I said, so what do the Muslims eat? And the reply was, I think they eat this, but they just don't ask too many questions.
Right.
So it's a kind of, and it's Muslim, as I understand it, it's kind of culturally Muslim. So, for example, there are parts of Kazakhstan where if you ask what language they speak, they'll say they speak Muslim. And they'll say they don't, it's more of a culture, it's more of their identity than a religion. It's not really, they don't, that's what it seemed to me. But I mean, you know, I bet somebody from Kazakhstan could listen to this and tell me I'm talking rubbish. So, you know, I'd be interested to hear that. But that's what it seemed to me.
The divorce rate, is that associated? I mean, is it a fairly sort of irreligious place? Is that the root of the divorce rate? Is the culture still sort of post-Soviet?
I think it is. I think it's a very irreligious place. You know, it's Islam, but I don't think Islam is particularly strict about divorce. And it's got a very tiny percentage of Catholics and Orthodox. We actually were invited by the Catholics, and it's got sort of a very easy divorce, which was created by the Soviet Union. I was a bit confused about that because in my history of communism, they had this huge liberalism in the 1920s that went disastrously wrong, and then they clamped down on it and became strict again. But so I don't know how, but anyway, they seem to, I think 40% divorce rate or something like that. I mean, I was hearing they were saying things like, oh, by the time you're 30, in your 30s, you might have had 2 divorces. You know, a very kind of a very sort of throwaway attitude. Actually,
is that the result of unfaithfulness, or
it's the result of? I mean, this is where for me it was kind of interesting because it was the result. It seemed to be the result of men not pulling their weight in the family. They sort of little prince complex, you know, I don't need to do anything because I'm a man and I'm the king of my castle and my mother's here backing me up. So that's what it seemed to be about. And that's what I kind of picked up on. And that's what I was, and actually I felt that the sorts of things I was saying in my talk actually tied in quite well with that, because I've spoken and written about fatherhood before, and one of the things I've always emphasized is the importance of the provider role, and that actually if you give men a feeling of responsibility, that they are supposed to, you know, that they need to look after their wives and children, and that their wives and children depend on them, that if you give them that sense, they will actually live up to it. And it's when you sort of let them off the hook that you'll get sort of so-called toxic masculinity. And I kind of felt, because I think the feminists, you know, if feminists had got in there, the feminists would be, you know, doing their bit, and they'd be saying, well, women, you know, you just have to go out and earn more money and get rid of the men. They'd be, you know, saying that message, but actually that message is just the road to hell, the road to further destruction. It's the direction they're already going in, and they need to change course. So I you know, so my saying, you know, I was saying things like, actually you need to encourage young boys from school age to feel that they have a responsible role in the family. you need to encourage them to get educated, to go out and get jobs, because they've got, because their families will depend on them. And I got a very positive response to that message.
Is there an awareness in the country that there's a problem?
Yes.
Is it a political priority to try and change the culture, I suppose, would be the...
Sorry?
Is that a political issue recognized in the country?
I'm sorry, I don't know. I probably should have, before I went, I was busy preparing my talks. I should have done a bit more. I've got lots of documents, but I hadn't read them all through. I know they've got the usual, the documents I had have the usual things, domestic violence and this and that, the usual. I don't know how much, what the political priorities are. I mean, it was really nice to be somewhere where I didn't feel feminism had got its claws in too deeply. Certainly there was no LGBT. At one point I was told I probably shouldn't talk about that, but of course, I can't, of course I did. So it is relatively, in that sort of sense, it's still a fairly healthy society. It hasn't had all our, but I can tell you that comprehensive sex education is on its way, and that there were documents about how to get comprehensive sex education into Kazakhstan. So, it was important to try to warn them about this. But I mean, you can't let them know. It would just be too shocking. I think the truth would have been too shocking for them. The sorts of things that's our bread and butter. I couldn't have told them. It would be horrific. It's incredible to think that our children get it, and I can't tell the adults there.
I think the problems you described, as far as I'm aware, they're symptomatic of post-Soviet societies. Like a lot of East Europe in previous decades, they had these problems quite seriously. I think in Russia, they've still got the same problems to a very significant degree. And as you were saying, they're not from the same source. They've got here, they're not from like liberal Western values undermining traditional family values. It's something else. But I think you put your finger on it. It's the loss of, in particular, male responsibility towards families. And it's hard to see how they can regain that without a real conscious effort to do that. But
I mean, it's interesting because, in a sense, that in itself is a product of communism. So it's not totally dissimilar from the, it is related. So somewhere the sort of feminist roots have come in, but I mean, in the Soviet Union, they had for so much longer time, from much earlier on, were pursuing the feminist ideals of full female employment. So maybe, so I guess that's partly where it comes in. I was puzzled. I would love to do an ethnography. I mean, I was puzzled because Astana I don't know, maybe not Astana specifically, but Kazakhstan's got a lot of minerals. Mining must be a very important industry there. So there should be a lot of male type labor. So,
mind you, with mining, that's obviously not, that's in specific locations, so that might result in dislocation of families.
That's true.
If the highly paid work is somewhere else.
That's very true. Like in Africa, where you'll get the men going off to the mines, or that's very, very true. And then the women are left on their own, and
that's generally been a disastrous situation for family life, hasn't it?
It has, yes, absolutely true. That you could have actually put your finger on the hit the nail on the head or whatever. I think that's very true, because and actually that was something that sort of I was taught, that came up in my fatherhood lecture, because it's just how much the nature of, we're talking here about fathers going off and leaving the family behind to work in the city, but within that sort of started with the Industrial Revolution, and the whole nature of fatherhood would have really significantly changed with the Industrial Revolution. So it's just a different level of extremity.
The same issues apply with immigration, don't they? When you have large numbers of young men moving to a society, moving to an alien culture, the probability of those embarking on traditional family life is probably quite low, particularly in the early years. And then there's families that are left behind as well. That's also affected. So it's really not a good point in terms of family.
It's an extremely unhealthy and it's very detrimental to both countries. I mean, I think there was a real problem in Poland with loads of the skilled men coming over here. But yes, we and I think that's going to become more of an issue in the future. Us stealing labor force from other countries because we've done everything to discourage reproduction in our own society. So we steal other people's populations to our own disadvantage and to their disadvantage.
Yeah, but it's partly that, and partly just that we accept a very substantial part of the population is able to work but doesn't, and meanwhile we sort of import workers from other countries. I mean, how that's going to work out in the longer term, I don't know. I think the way we take, for example, medical staff from other countries, it's just highly unethical.
It is.
People tend to be proud of it. They're really proud of how many doctors from poor countries we've got working in the NHS. Isn't that wonderful? Then the other thing is, we're going off a bit of a tangent. Sometimes the doctors who do that they're treated as though they're some sort of medical missionaries, that they've made a sacrifice to come to Britain to help us with our healthcare and to earn 10 times as much money. And we're not criticize them. If the freedom's there to do it and they choose to do it, that's absolutely fine. But they're not like charity workers coming here.
Absolutely not. It's their country that misses out, and it's their country that needs them the most.
Yeah. There was a letter written by, I think it was 10 African nations, did a joint letter to Britain saying, please stop stealing our medical staff. Yeah. And the British government just said, nope, we're going to do it. We're going to keep doing it. Just go back to you saying about the soldiers being recruited from these more remote regions. I mean, I've heard that's taking place at the moment in Russia because they don't want the casualties in Moscow and St. Petersburg, where the grieving mothers are going to end up in front of TV cameras and protesting in Red Square or whatever. So they tend to draw their recruits from more remote parts of Russia. I can't really imagine that tradition has gone back a long way as well.
Yes. It's interesting you say that, because just at the airport on my way back, I got chatting with a Russian from Tomsk who'd been sort of living in Astana and was now going to live in Germany, and this was his way of protesting because he disagreed with Putin, and that was So I guess from you saying that, I can see he's probably getting out before they start recruiting in Siberia.
Yeah. I would just before we came on, I was remembering one of the things you were talking about at the family party conference last year. That was very interesting. You were saying that male wages, now correct me if I'm wrong, that male wages correlate with marriage rates.
Oh yes, absolutely. This was again something which I was talking about, and the evidence on this is overwhelming. So. And it's not just that, so the men who earn more are more likely to get married, or an area which has more male employment will have higher rates of marriage. Men with higher qualifications will have higher rates of marriage. But interestingly, it also works the other way around as well. So in areas where women start earning more in relation to men, marriage rates go down, and rates of single parenthood increase as women start earning more than men. And so, there was a really amazing study. It was, if anybody's interested in it, the author was, his surname is Autor. He did one report called Wayward Sons. A lot of this information is in Wayward Sons. And then there's another one where he looks like really significant statistical studies. But basically, and if women's wages went down, when women got poorer, marriage rates, as long as men's wages stayed the same, marriage rates would go up, and there would be more children born within marriage, and eventually poverty goes down. I mean, it's so contrary to what the feminists are doing. It's
so the mission to close the gender pay gap is now, obviously you and I don't think the gender pay gap is a problem to be solved. It just reflects the different priorities and choices men and women make. But moves to close the gender pay gap are also going to be moves that will reduce the marriage rate and reduce the total fertility rate as well.
Yes. I mean, I think, do you know there are still people out there who think the gender pay gap means that men and women are not paid equally for the same job. They think that's still an issue. They don't realize that definitely men and women are paid equally for the same work. But I think that the reason feminists keep harping on about the gender wage gap is simply because they want to increase female earnings, because they want women to be able to manage without men. Feminism is based on the destruction of the family, and I always get really taken aback to just find the same arguments being, it's like, I'm well into my 50s now and I'm finding the same arguments being rehashed by young women. I can't believe that they're not moving on.
Just with the wage thing as well, I found it quite interesting. Now, I understand before my time, back in whatever decade, there used to be the general idea in society that there was such a thing as a man's wage and a woman's wage. So if you were, say, the council and you were employing people to do some sort of manual work, that would be a man's wage. So that would be a high wage. And then for jobs that were normally done by women, that would be a women's wage. So it was just understood that you didn't pay women as much as men because, well, for whatever reason, that's just what you did. That was just the culture. Now, I'm not defending that. I'm not saying that was fair or anything at all. What I'm saying is I can see some logic behind it, because if that's the case, that's going to lead to more people getting married and more people having children and potentially a healthier society. Now, just to repeat before someone edits, well, it's too late. They'll cut the edit by now. Just to say, I'm not recommending that. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm just saying, looking back though, could see some sense.
Well, I mean, the feminists they liked to portray this simply as discrimination against women, and I'm not saying I think we should be paid equal wages for equal work, but it wasn't anything to do with discrimination against women. It was because the unit through which people were basing their policy was the family. And feminism changed this to the individual. And when you look at things in terms of the family lens, so for example, if a woman got married, the reason, it would be awful to get married and lose your job. And I would be the first up in arms if I got married and somebody took my job away. Make no mistake. But the reason they did that was like, oh, well, you've got some help being supported, so this person doesn't, so we'll give it to someone who doesn't have the sort of financial backup. And that was in turn related to the fact that women were more likely to be at home looking after children because they wanted to be. So everything was, if you look at things, if instead of looking at things as individuals, you look at things in terms of the functioning of the family, that was how things worked. That was even how the vote. When I did a lot of research on the suffragettes and the suffragists, and I actually found that where before women got the vote, where the woman was the head of the household, she would get the vote. So it wasn't about whether you were male or female. It was about who was the head of the household, and for reasons of family organization. So yeah, I think. Yes. Anyway, no, I'm not saying.
Just another thing I was saying about the male-female wage idea, because what happens at the moment is generally that often it's a twin income couple, twin income family, and when child comes along, often the mum would like to work less, would like to be able to be at home with the kid, and just to be sustained on the father's income. Transferable tax allowance would help with that. But if you go back to this idea that apparently existed in previous decades of a man's wage and a woman's wage. So in that situation, that family actually, it would seem as if the woman would actually prefer it I mean, let's take an example. Let's say we've got people working at the council. Someone's been a school cleaner, someone's been a grave digger. That's normally the thing I say. So if we say they, probably today they might get paid about the same. But if instead there was a culture you had a male wage and a female wage, so a grave digger, that's a man's job, so we pay them twice as much as the woman gets for the school cleaning. Again, just to put in here, I'm not recommending this. I'm not saying this is right. I'm just saying, let's imagine. So imagine that was the system. Then, so they get married. So you've got the school cleaner and the grave digger married, and then the school cleaner, mum, has time off work to look after the kids, but their income doesn't half. They're still getting 2/3 of their income because the man got paid more. So again, I'm not saying it was right. I'm not saying we should go back to it, but it's just that system that apparently was in operation, I don't know, 50 or 100 years ago, it had advantages in terms of people getting married and mums being able to stay at home with their kids while the family income was sustained. So it had things going for it. Now, I say, I'm not suggesting we go back to that, but certainly we need to look at ways of overcoming the challenges that families face now in the absence of that sort of system.
Well, we do. I mean, at the moment, the way that the tax system is set up, it really, really penalizes the where just the man works. It's so we really that really does need to be sorted out and got rid of, or it's what's happening at the moment is so badly wrong. When you start, I was just recently looking at all the data on the way that taxes and benefits work, and it's just as bad as it was when I looked at it 7 years ago. Actually, I think it's worse. It's extraordinary, the different, and you're penalized for having children really heavily. You're penalized for having children. You're penalized for looking after them, and not a little bit, a lot. Severely, heavily, so we've got serious problems that need resolving.
Something we find a bit frustrating when our sons were young was that my wife didn't have a sort of full-time job for several years, or yes, it didn't have a regular job in any case for several years while she's been a full-time mum. But meanwhile, you see a lot of other mums who will have a job, take I don't know, a year or 18 months or whatever off maternity leave, so they're getting paid for being at home with their kids, but my wife wasn't. Then they'd go back to work for a few months and then back on again, so they've been paid again for it. And as far as the employers, well, I don't know what the right word would be. Sometimes you get the impression that people are playing the system in order to just keep the money flowing, but basically they're in a situation where the employer's having to pay them for not working. Whereas someone who sort of hasn't got a job has devoted themselves to childcare, that's the family absolutely at the bottom of the heap, because there's no reward through an employer, and the government's got nothing to offer as well. I remember a few years ago, I discussed this with a Lib Dem MP, Christine Jardine from Edinburgh West, and I said to her, what policies have the Lib Dems got to help the couple with children with a single income? And she couldn't even understand the question. She couldn't understand the question. It just did not compute for her at all.
I mean, the crazy thing about it is that it's not only a real problem for the children and for the families, because there's no one at home to look after the kids. It's really dysfunctional for the families. But I remember one of the things which I'd wanted to write an article on when I was doing a lot more writing for Conservative Woman. I'd been thinking how I can't remember what law had just been passed, but not in a public context, but when you talk with people privately, you hear so many stories of these little businesses, on which our countries depend, being destroyed. I just heard one the other day where it was a story about, it was from the person doing an accountant doing taxes, about how having to deal with a number of maternity leaves at the same time had finished off a company. And when you start asking questions about how it's damaging the working environment, again, there's a whole interesting story, which I remember this was a few years ago. I thought that would be really interesting to look at because it's like one of those taboo subjects, which, I always find very attractive.
But there's certainly some employers who don't employ women who they fear might have maternity leave. Because you're not allowed to ask. And so if you can't afford it.
It's so difficult I wouldn't blame an employer because I know how, I know that this is how women think, and it's a perfectly fair enough thought. I have heard people who said that I have heard women say they became doctors because being a doctor combines really well with childcare. This is well known. And, so of course women work out, they plan things and get jobs, which is a completely normal and sensible strategy. But we do need to look at the consequences of this for the workplace.
Yeah. I used to find it slightly frustrating in teaching, where you have a 2-month summer holiday, and then people would come back from maternity leave like a week before the end of the summer term, at a stage where there's no useful work for you to do at all. But you obviously come back to get your salary going through the 2 months of the holiday. And I look at that and think, well, okay, I'm not sure that's really ethical entirely. I'm not sure if I was in that situation, which obviously wouldn't be, but I'm not sure that's really the right way to see the system and to play it in that regard. But like I say, it's taken for granted though that's the way to act.
The thing that I find really kind of contradictory is that the whole feminist argument was based on the premise that men and women are exactly the same, and therefore there should be no unequal outcomes in the workplace. And just the other day, I saw some blooming headline that menopausal women should be allowed to work from home. And it's just like, get a life. It's just really, if we're going to participate in the workplace, let's do so properly. And I remember a few years ago, there was all stuff about women with PMT, and oh my word, it's anyway.
We get more than our fair share of these. So everything's worse for women things from the government-funded feminist organisations in Scotland. Now, I'm sure some things do work out differently for men and women. Some things might benefit women, some things might benefit men. That does happen. But these organisations, their mission is only to find ways in which women are disadvantaged. And I saw one, I think it was yesterday, and it was saying when explosive munitions are used in built-up areas, women are disproportionately affected. So when bombs are dropped in cities, and I thought that's probably true because the men are probably
out fighting
away in the army, fighting. So forget about that. But we don't need to worry about them being in danger. But it's just so tiring to see everything looked at through the same lens just to find another grievance. It's wearisome.
It is really tiring, and the thing is, right. One could really do the same thing for men, and I'm sure we could find a lot more for men. I've kind of been, done my men's rights stuff, and I'm sure, but it's like, really, who wants to do that? Who wants to join this moaning, whinging? I don't want to. It's a tricky one because as a result, I just can't, like you were saying about listening to Radio 4. And I admire you. I guess that you do need to do this sort of thing. But it's like, I just can't listen to it because I just get cross. I get too cross. I like living in my peaceful little world and forgetting what idiots there are out there.
I find on the radio that there's no other talk radio to listen to on my ancient car radio. I don't think. AM and FM. I think on digital radio, you've got a bit of a choice. But I'm experimenting a bit with Times Radio at the moment, and it's not quite as professional as Radio 4, but I do think it's not as biased. It seems a bit more balanced. I would say. I haven't listened to very much, but
I don't know. But I had an interesting one the other day where I've done LBC lots of times, and to talk on some women-related issue or other women-related issue. And this was about, what was it about? It was about women suddenly realizing that they wanted to stay at home. And I made the point that actually the people, it was actually the better off women who had husbands to support them, who were more likely to make that choice. And it was a woman, a female presenter on LBC. She actually cut me off. She straight cut me off. Bam. Just like that. You know, you can't talk about the fact that women are supported by men and actually like this and benefit from this. I just got cut off. Physically,
I phoned through to BBC Radio Scotland a few times, and I've learned that the trick is, because you phone up and they say, what would you like to say? So at that point, obviously, you have to give the vaguest, blandest waffle about what you're going to say. Otherwise, just forget it. But if you actually explain, what I'm going to say, they say, all right, thank you very much. Yeah, we'll call you if you're interested. Bang, down goes the phone. So you have to be really vague. But then when you get on, you realize immediately that the presenter turns. Because normally it's a pretty easygoing, light-hearted, friendly, chatty sort of program. But as soon as they get the drift of what you're saying, then that all changes. And they how do you know that? Why do you know that? What do you mean? Completely out of character with the rest of the program until you're dealt with, and then they get you off the line. Then it goes back to the friendly chat and what do you share your thoughts with us?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, they can get very aggressive when they don't like what you're saying. But, there we go.
Now I've got a few more news things from up here in Scotland. You can give us your thoughts on those and have a quick chat about them. I mean, it's just something that's been in the news this week is another school strike. I'm not talking about the school strike where teachers are wanting more money, and some head teachers are wanting a £9,600 pay rise. That's why they've been on strike, because they want a £9,600 pay rise to take them, I think, from like 99,000 to whatever, almost 110,000. And that's why some of them have been on strike. So I'm not talking about those strikes, but there is another school strike where the staff are on strike because of the behavior of the pupils. They say they're just not going to go in and put up with it. It's dangerous. And so I would be very supportive of that strike and say absolutely the staff should not be forced to go and put up with that.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, I mean, maybe it will make schools start reconsidering how they deal with discipline. I don't know. You're a teacher, but obviously something's going really badly wrong when pupils are that badly behaved, and things need to change. One would hope they'd take on that message.
It's interesting with this issue, because talk to virtually any teacher. Well, most of them will say there's a real problem in our school. There's a real problem with the behavior of the pupils. But it doesn't seem to break through into the sort of political discussion. I guess all the head teachers, it's not in any head teacher's interest to say, my school's a jungle, behavior's appalling. That's like saying I'm really rubbish at my job. Why don't you fire me? So they've always got to try and put the best face on it. I think what's going on the ground is often not good at all.
Do you in Scotland pay lots of, follow what's, Catherine Burble-Singh and Michaela? Because I know that she's been very influential in the English school system in her kind of, sort of zero tolerance approach.
Certainly not. So how dare you speak those words? That'll get censored here. Do you not pay attention to Catherine Burble-Singh and what's happening? Because it's. No, there's no diversity of views in Scotland. It's just groupthink, total groupthink. And the move is basically away from any form of punishments to have restorative practices instead. We have these like mini counselling sessions with pupils instead, because the pupils are inherently nice. And if you just are nice enough to them, then their natural goodness will overflow into good behaviour. And the longer it goes, the worse things get. The solution is always, we just need to go even further in that direction. Can you just say, I don't know if this is something on my computer, but all the comments are coming up in is it Cyrillic text? Is that what it's called? They're coming up looking like Russian.
It's funny because I was determined to learn Cyrillic after I came back from Kazakhstan. I'm not on the comments. Hold on, let me just see. But I haven't learnt. How funny. Perhaps they heard the word Kazakhstan and it's all the...
It's auto-translating. Yes, so something very strange has happened there.
I didn't learn Cyrillic, so That's interesting, isn't it?
Uh-huh. So I assume that's something to do with my computer, so don't worry about that. I'll come to some of the comments at the end. So that's the school strike. Something else I made a video this week. The Scottish government earlier on this year, they issued new sentencing guidelines to judges saying that anyone under the age of 25 is sort of not necessarily criminally responsible. So it sort of maybe wasn't their fault because their brain isn't very mature. Problems with it. First of all, the fact that you've done the crazy thing, you've committed the crime, is evidence that your decision making is immature or hasn't developed properly. So committing the crime is evidence that you're not to blame for it. The other thing is, it's taken the group in society who most need deterring, who might be the most irresponsible and wild, and it's saying to them, there's actually the least deterrent. The punishment you will get are less. It even goes to the point of saying, for the same crime, a young people should get a shorter sentence than an older person, which is just straightforward, plain and simple age discrimination. We already know that for the same crime, a man will generally get a far harsher sentence than a woman. So that already happens, and they're quite happy with that. So they now want to introduce age discrimination into it as well, which should be a massive, massive controversy in Scotland. But as with so many of these things, it just floats on barely without comment. Have you come across anything like that before in the criminal justice system?
No, I mean, I know about the extent to which men will be really significantly punished disproportionately to women, and that seems, crazy. And I guess they're just extending that. So it's
the reverse. It's the reverse of the hate crime idea. The hate crime idea is you get a more severe sentence if it's between certain groups or whatever. Your group identity can affect the sentence. I suppose this is just another form of the same philosophy.
It does just sound like more craziness.
Yeah.
Encouraging people not to take responsibility for their actions, encouraging young people not to take responsibility for their actions. I mean, it sounds like there's someone who just wants to destroy society. If you're going to say to young people, you don't know any, up to the age of 25. It's just giving them a green light, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if people are that way inclined and they're under 25, it's just, it's already so difficult to actually catch a person for anything. I know it is in England. You can give videos, and it's crazy. So yeah.
I mean, as it's got a comment to do. First, I say, if 25. Under 25s, if their brain is not mature enough to be able to make sensible decisions, they shouldn't be able to vote. Yeah. But of course, that goes the other way.
Yes,
it's the thing. It's trying to treat adults like children and children like adults.
Yes.
So it's trying to reverse everything, make it backwards. So 12-year-olds can make medical decisions and got medical confidentiality, but 24-year-old isn't fully criminally responsible. I mean, it's just bizarre.
Did you see that comment just then? Well, if they're going to be treated as not criminally responsible, surely they're not old enough to vote either.
Yeah, well, Scotland, you can vote when you're 16.
Right. Well, they should take. It's so logically inconsistent.
And they're also saying, I'm not sure if this is a formal proposal, but it's been seriously discussed that you should be able to become a member of the Scottish Parliament at age 16. So you can become a member of the Scottish Parliament at 16, but you're not fully responsible for your actions until you're 25. That's the direction. I mean, it makes no sense, sense at all. Right. Now I'll just go back to a comment from early on. I don't know if David is still here. I'll just answer this one. Do we agree support Scotland being part of the United Kingdom? The family party's position is that we're neutral, but we don't support a referendum in the immediate future. Okay, for the next time there's an election, we'll decide how exactly to word our policy. If there were to be a referendum at a point in the future, we wouldn't campaign for one side or another. But at the moment, we don't support there being another Scottish independence referendum for various reasons that we could talk about maybe at a different time. Right, we've just got 10 minutes. Just wanted to raise one other thing from a book I've been reading. Been very, very interesting. Here it is. Regular viewers will know I've been trying to educate myself a little bit about issues related to drugs. So I've got this book, Philosophy and Psychedelics. And what it's about is using psychedelic drugs to treat mental health problems. So if someone's depressed or anxiety, so proper real mental health problems, not just someone who's feeling a bit down or whatever. So there's a serious long-term mental health problem. Psychiatrists have found through recent research, just in the last few years, that sometimes giving people a controlled dose of a psychedelic drug in a controlled environment as part of ongoing counseling and therapy can actually be very beneficial to people, which is one thing that's very interesting. The other thing that's interesting about them is often when people take these drugs, they describe what's happened to them when they've been on their trip or whatever, having their psychedelic experience. They describe it as having great spiritual significance or moral significance, or it's that they've found true harmony with the universe, or they're now in tune with their inner consciousness, or whatever. That this sort of, I don't know, sort of new agey language, I would describe it. And some people who are helped by this, they take on beliefs that are based on these experiences. Some people don't. The evidence seems to be that the positive effect doesn't necessarily depend on someone actually believing that these experiences had any significance. But a lot of people do say their beliefs have changed. And that the fundamental question, I suppose, is if these drugs do actually help to solve problems, then that's a good thing. But might it be that they help to solve problems at the cost of people taking on some, in my humble opinion, quite wacky and unjustified beliefs? I mean, what do you make of that? The whole thing's really weird.
I think that I think it's something where you've got to look at the long-term effects. It was drawn to my attention as a young person, without going into too many details, that one could suffer severe depression a number of years after taking magic mushrooms, for example, and that was, I heard about this from a pharmacist. So what is the long term? I think with all of these things, you need to do your research for quite a long while. I mean, how does it, what are the consequences a few years later? I mean, there is quite a history of this, isn't there, in psychology? I mean, didn't Freud and Jung get their patients to take, love?
Yeah, there was dabbling in it, but for many decades, it hasn't been allowed.
Yes,
I think the guidelines have been relaxed recently.
I think that's probably very sound that it's not allowed. And I mean, where I believe that there are medicinal uses for certain physical conditions, and those are areas where maybe what is it? These varied CBD. I don't know the names of it. They may have a role. It sounds. To me, I don't know. I'd be a bit hesitant. I can imagine that, how much of this is about psychologists enjoying the experiment. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, at least we're not going. I mean, I don't know if you've been hearing what's been going on in Canada to people with mental health problems. I mean, hopefully we've got a way to go before we go in that direction. I mean, it's just been. Have you heard about the way in which they're assisting? It's just terrible. And
medically assisted basically assisted suicide. But there's a bill in the Scottish Parliament at the moment for assisted suicide, which might well pass. It doesn't cover mental illness, but it's an inevitable, logical, slippery slope.
This is the thing: is that it's a slippery slope, and what's happening in Canada, what's happening, it just proves that. I actually saw something horrific on Twitter yesterday. It was a clothes company that was advertising assisted suicide, and they had this beautiful thing where they actually heavily glamorized made look at this intense emotional experience, and it seems that it was a woman who then went on to commit suicide. And I'm just wondering, what did her family get paid for this? Is this like some snuff movie? I mean, it was just the most extraordinary thing imaginable. Awful, absolutely awful. So Canada is worse than Scotland.
We would challenge that, actually. But we had a Canadian politician on the live stream once, and we had a competition to see which was further gone in extreme progressivism, Scotland or Canada. And it ended up as a draw. I think we went through about 7 categories, and it ended up as a dead heat. So we're quite cautious of people claiming that their country is the most extreme and progressive nation, because Scotland competes pretty hard. Just going back to the drugs thing. I don't know, I've met a few people who've had a history of drug taking, and quite often their worldview, their spiritual worldview, is very much along the lines of experiencing oneness with the cosmic harmonic consciousness type thinking. I know that sounds a bit sarcastic or whatever, but you know the sort of things I'm talking about. More sort of Eastern religious, New Agey sort of thinking. And I'm starting to wonder, is that sort of spiritual outlook caused to some extent by taking psychedelic drugs?
Really interesting. That's a really interesting thought. How much, I mean, that's never occurred to me before, but how much of the sort of changes in religious attitude were a product of all the drug taking which people did?
Because the thing they say, Eastern religion, the meditation's a big thing. So there's people who are saying, if you meditate very, very intensively, you can induce experiences that are comparable to the experiences on psychedelic drugs, and also tend to lead to the same sort of oneness with the universal consciousness type experiences. So I'm wondering if there's some set of strange psychological effects that can be induced by meditation, or extreme meditation, or induced even more effectively by psychedelic drugs. And there's a substantial part of the population whose spiritual beliefs have actually been caused, it's not irrational, they've been caused by these things that affect the way that the brain works. I mean, an example of it, it's very interesting, an example of the sort of thing that happens, because they do various brain scans when people are having these experiences. And there'll be this is very roughly speaking, there'll be a part of the brain that deals with our sense of self, an inner world, inner thought world. Or there'll be a part of the brain that deals with making sense of the external world. And they can see that under the influence of these drugs, the communication between these two parts of the brain increases dramatically, which seems to make sense of the experiences. I feel like we're all part of the same thing. I'm part of nature. I'm not separate from everything else. So it seems like this is a sort of chemically induced, delusion's the right word, certainly experience, but then it causes people to form beliefs based on it. So I've got, that's my working hypothesis in any case. So,
that's really interesting. I mean, I'm I've got my attitude is that I like to sort of get to the truth of things, and any kind of stimulant is just going to obscure the truth rather than help achieve it. So that's my alcohol included sort of thing. I do.
Let's just look at a few more comments. So, John, Scottish legal system become very complicated. Tell me about it. I'm becoming an amateur lawyer at the moment, and that you won't hear the details of that story for a long time. But it certainly is complicated. What happened to the branch meeting in Livingston? It happened on Thursday last week, so you must have missed that somehow. But keep your eye open. We'll have another one in the new year, and we're hoping to start a Livingston branch, a West Lothian branch, before too long. So we're looking for someone just to take the lead and be the branch chairman for that. So, very true. Psychedelic drugs give people mental health problems. Yeah, that is absolutely true. This research, when I first heard about it, I thought it was like on the BBC or the Guardian. I thought, that's just some people clutching at straws, because they're actually people that are very liberal about drugs, and they think it's really cool that someone's found some scrap of evidence that. But there is more to it than that. I mean, there is serious research showing serious benefits for treating conditions. So it's quite a complex area. Maybe we talk about it another time.
Interesting. Interesting. Yes, I won't be judgmental.
Absolutely. Yeah, Beatles, Guru, and all sorts of them. Yeah. Death of a Guru deals with this subject. All right, okay. Right, Phil, you can maybe tell us about that a bit more in a future week. Right. Where was it? I was asked about it and I was ignored. Well, I'm sure you weren't ignored. Maybe if someone didn't quite reply to a message, we got an awful lot of messages, but it was publicized on social media, etc., etc. So make it along next time. We'll be delighted to see you. Right, the hour has flown by, as it always does. So thanks for watching. Thanks for your comments as well, and those of you who are watching later. Belinda, it's always good to talk to you.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. Nice to talk to you too.
Yeah, keep us up to date with what you're working on and your thoughts, and we will look forward to hearing from you. Before too long.
Will do. Yes.
Right. Thanks very much. Thanks everyone. Good night, and see you next week.
Okay. Good night.